In this episode, I said I'd do something different. We're making a table. So my office space for editing these videos, I didn't actually have a bench or a work desk available when I purchased the computer. So I had the computer set up on the camp table with a bit of timber on top of it, which is quite ordinary to work on, very wobbly. So I decided, rather than buy something, I decided to make something. Now, I'm not a good welder at all. I'm only learning what you'll see next. So please don't take this as a how to do this. It's more just to learn how to make something.
Now you're probably wondering, why would you make this rather than buy a brand new one out of a store? It comes down to cost and ability. So all up, it cost me about $30 or so in steel, and then probably another, say, $40 in bits and pieces. I already had a heap of plywood hanging around in the shed, and I already had some 30mm steel. All in all, for less than $100, I've made a table that would probably cost $300-400 to buy. Plus I've had the satisfaction of making something for myself.
Well, first you need to cut up your lengths of steel. So I've drawn up a bit of a diagram just with a cut list. So I've got 4 lengths at 700 for my height, 4 lengths at 440 for my width of the table, and then 3 lengths of 1340 for my length. So obviously if you cut it up first, it's going to be a lot easier to work out as you go along and weld it up. Next step, I'm just going to tidy up the edges and make it a bit easier to weld up. The other thing to note is if you use an angle grinder to cut this stuff, the ends are not going to be square. So obviously you would have seen me use a drop saw. It's not perfect, but for this job it will be just fine. But yeah, using an angle grinder, you can do it, but you're not really ever going to get square results. So I'm just aiming to clean up these edges around here a little bit.
Sorry about the audio quality in this one, guys. It seems I need to play with my camera settings to perfect it in the next video.
Alright, now that I've gone through and stripped off the edges of this steel, I'm just going to run over just the corners with the wire cut brush. So yeah, just a heads up, the wire on these brushes does tend to come loose eventually, which will end up all over the front of you if you're not careful. So usually I'll wear an old shirt and obviously safety glasses and earmuffs. Now I know some of you are probably thinking, weld through primer on this steel. Yes it is, but I watched on a YouTube video quite recently about chassis welding and weld through primer, and it's really only there to protect the steel, and it doesn't produce good welds. And now this is just a table, so it's not really holding any weight, but just sort of give it a try and see if it actually makes a difference with the welds.
Now, I'm not normally in the habit of listening to everything that I hear on the internet, but sometimes you've got to try these things out for yourself.
So basically what I'm going to be using to make sure everything's square is I've got 2 of these magnetic angle things. Obviously standard set square, and I've got just a nice level. So basically all I'm going to be doing is laying the steel out like this. Just use those magnets like that and stick your square on it just to double check. So once these are in, I'll be able to just check it with the level, make sure we're happy this way and that way and whatever, make sure everything's all good, and then I'll just tack it up. Alright, now that I've done all this, I've got my welder turned on. Should quickly mention that the steel I'm using is 30mm square tube and a 1.6mm profile. Don't need anything stronger than this. For this job, this is going to be plenty. So basically, I'm just going to dial in my welder, shoot it on the iPhone so you can see, but this weld is pretty straightforward. You just put in your steel thickness and away you go. You can fine tune it a bit, but I find that once you put in that setting in your welder, it's all pretty straightforward really. The other thing to note, same with before, this welder does create quite a bit of spark, so I like to put on a fair bit of safety gear. I'm wearing a pretty old t-shirt, so I'm not so worried about holes in it, but I don't want holes burned into my arms, so obviously wear something long sleeve, wear your proper welding mask, wear some gloves. One thing I should mention here is I did keep burning holes through the tube because it is so thin. So I've had to sort of pulse it and go tack by tack, just so I didn't burn through it all. So I was just working out how to do this next bit to keep, obviously, it needs to be square here and square on this side, so the table is square. This tube also needs to be square with that, so I think I got it close. I think I'll just have to tack it all together after a few checks, and then don't weld it up until I've squared it off, I guess. So So I've just placed it on the ground so I can get up to this level and work on it. So I guess we'll just try and mock it up as best we can. I think for this job it'll do just fine, so I'll just tack that in place there. Yeah, that's good enough for me, so I'm just going to tack this side in and keep going. Alright, now that that's all tacked up, we'll do the last piece, and then we can go through and just weld it all up, I guess. So that's it all tacked up. I'll just weld it through off camera. You've probably seen enough welding for the day. Now, one thing I didn't mention was for it to be a table, it needs to sit on the ground flat. I didn't take into account that the steel would twist before when I welded everything up, and I ended up having to cut a few of the bars away to realign it on flat ground and tack it back up. So it's probably not as pretty as it was earlier, but I've got it flat now.
After I welded everything up, I then went back through and sanded all the welds flat. Normally I wouldn't really do this, but I wanted the table to have that nice sort of smooth look.
I had to really quickly finish it off, grind all the corners and smooth the welds off and get some paint on there. Things tend to rust pretty quickly here, so I just wanted to get it covered. So the frame's all sorted. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's good enough for this job. It will hold, a computer and whatnot up just fine. Next step is underneath this table, I've got a couple of bits of ply I've already cut down. So I'm going 600 wide by, I think it was 1600 long. I've just cut two 12mm bits of ply. I'm going to sand them back quickly.
Here I am just sanding the rough finish off them. I'm just using some 80 grit sandpaper on my sander.
Now I've sanded it back, I'm just going to glue it a couple of different ways. So there's a couple of knots with some holes in them. I'm going to just put some liquid nails in there just to fill the holes out. Now I've read you probably want something quite thin, but because this ply isn't that great, I'll fill those holes with liquid nails and then I'll come through and just put some wood glue on it, and then we'll chuck a whole bunch of weight on it, and hopefully that is enough to glue them together. I've just got some leftover bottles of wood glue. Hopefully there's enough, we'll find out very shortly. That's it there, loaded up with as much junk as I could find. It's all quite heavy stuff. Now that the glue's dried and the two bits of ply are stuck together pretty well, I'm just going to trim it up. So I'm just going to take 10 mil off this end just to square it up, and then I'll turn it around and then trim it down to 1600. Alright, next step is going to be sanding the top down.
So here I am just putting some screws in to hold the timber to the frame. I've used some 45mm wood screws just to allow enough penetration to go through both layers of the plywood.
So that's my table. Last thing to do is carry it inside and set the computer up on it. I had the intention to stain the top. I had some leftover, there's some leftover orange stain and some like sort of charcoaly black stuff. I was going to wash the black stuff down and just stain the top black and leave the faces exposed, but honestly ran out of time. I have sanded the top and I kind of like the raw finish the way it is, so it will have to do for now until I get some time to restain it. But yeah, I've got a functioning table now. Anyway, thanks for watching. Next video will be a bit of work on the 80 series, so I will be pulling the injectors out and testing them. I don't think I'll have time to order new tips for them, which I will do. I'm expecting these injectors in this car to be pretty tight, but at least I'll film pulling them out, what you need to do, how to test them. Anyway, if you like what you've seen or if you're excited for next week, please like, subscribe, comment. It means a lot.